Welcome everybody. Right, let's start. So my name is Sophie Code. I'm the event manager at Surrey Wildlife Trust. So I'd like to welcome you all to this evening's webinar. I will do the boring bit before the real excitement starts. So I will just do a bit of etiquette on Zoom. What do I need to say? There'll be a Q&A feature. So if you think of a burning question at any point in the presentation, do just pop your question into the Q&A function. It makes it really easy for us to manage the questions that way, because when our host Ollie reads out the questions to Dan, I can dismiss it and then the next question can appear. If you can, please avoid putting questions in the chat function. The chat is mainly for issues like if you can't hear or there's something you need help with, you can use the chat function. You can chat with all the hosts and participants and ask questions using the Q&A function. We will try to respond to as many questions as possible within the time limit, and chat will be enabled, so you can all chat as well. Any issues, please, you can email me contact me on the chat directly. Said my name's Sophie, and that's a bit about it really. But just to summarize, chat used for technical issues, needing help. Question and answer function, which is at the bottom of your screen, used for the questions to our lovely panelists this evening. So without further ado, I would like to present my lovely colleague Oliver Fry to give you a bit of context on why we're talking about nightingales this evening. Oliver, over to you.
Thanks very much, Sophie, and good evening, everyone. It's lovely to have you with us tonight. It's always a bit strange doing these things via Zoom. It can feel a bit disconnected, but we want to extend our warmest welcome, and I hope you do feel welcome and you have a good time. We're going to keep this quite informal. We really look forward to taking and answering your questions after Dan's finished his presentation on nightingales. Now, I know you're all here to hear about nightingales from a proper conservationist like Dan, but I've just got a couple of things I want to say before we introduce him. And that's firstly, thank you for supporting us in general, not just being here tonight, but being supporters. And many of you I know are members of the Trust. We're a small and lean and hardworking outfit with a really, really big job to do. And your support means the world to us. We don't take it for granted for a moment. And just to reiterate why we're all here, we're not just hoping to raise awareness and keep you interested in nightingales and the wider work of the Trust, but to draw your attention to the effects, to the attempts we're making to raise a bit more money so we can do a bit more work to conserve nightingales and the habitats they live in. A lot of statistics get bandied around about the decline of nature in the UK, but the one that kind of sticks with me is the fact that up to 1/3 of Surrey's species are at risk of disappearing or are under serious threat, and we're working really, really hard to try and do something about that. With this new campaign we're launching, which is called Save Surrey's Nature. There's lots of information about that online, so I won't bore you with the detail. We've got 3 key objectives, really. That's to protect more of Surrey's habitats, including on our own reserves, but also more widely. We want to connect more of them up, so wildlife has a better set of opportunities to find food, to find mates, to avoid the effects of climate change and other threats. And we want to educate and involve more people in caring for nature. So far, we've raised £84,000 since launching that campaign, I think back in April. We've got a long way to go to reach our target of £1 million. But as a result of signing up to this webinar tonight, you've already helped us raise an additional £145, which is money that will be well spent to help protect habitats. Every penny counts, and every donation is very warmly and gratefully received. I think that's enough of that. Time to introduce Dan. Dan's one of our most he's one of our most valued members of staff because he does several jobs all at once. He's our citizen science officer who plays a really key role in the Space for Nature project. He helps train and monitor and supervise tranches of volunteers throughout the summer, spring and autumn months. He's a very keen bird watcher and bird ringer in his spare time, and he knows a hell of a lot about birds and other wildlife across Surrey. So he'll look forward to answering your questions on all that later on. I'll chip in if I can be of any use too. Anyway, time for Dan to begin his peroration. I will give way to you now, Dan. And thank you very much again for joining us. I hope you have a good time tonight.
Thank you very much, Ollie. I will share my screen now. I just think it's going to disappear very quickly. I have to wait for the other screen to stop sharing. There we go, and I will share my screen. And I hope everyone can see that. So we're going to talk about nightingales tonight, common nightingales, Lucinia megarynchos. I'm not very good at Latin, so do forgive me if I pronounce that wrong. But basically, the Latin name comes from the fact that Lucinia basically means nightingale. So there are 4 other species of nightingale in the group, and megarynchos means a big bill. So they're called megarynchos because of the big song that we will listen to later on. And nightingales are steeped in lots of cultural history, and the name is derived from the word night and an Old English word gallan, which means to sing. So, like I said, they're very famed for their singing, and that's why we love them, because actually when we look at nightingales, they're not the most spectacular birds. They do have a lovely rufusy brown tail, which you can see here, which is a defining characteristic of them, but they are quite unassuming. They're brown birds. They don't have any fancy colors like other birds, so their song makes them heard and makes them known. The bird I'm circling at the moment on the left-hand side is an adult nightingale, and they're about the size of a robin, a little bit bigger, and they have a much longer wing because they tend to fly a lot further. Their migration routes are quite big, so they need that longer wing to be able to fly. But as I said, it's quite unassuming. One of the best identification features for you to look out for if you want to see this bird in the wild is this lovely white eye ring. And you may also notice that the bird has a rather large eye as well. This is actually an adaptation for the bird because they sing 24 hours a day when they arrive in this country. And in order to do that, you need a large eye to sing at night so you can still see what's going on. They also migrate overnight as well. So that nice big eye helps with seeing as they're migrating. It's safer to migrate at night. There are less predators around, and you can cover the ground a lot quicker because you're not worried about other predators hunting you. So that's basically your identification features of the adult. If you were looking for juveniles, some of you may see that this resembles a robin chick slightly. And that's one of the confusing identifications of this species, is that it looks like a robin when it's young. However, as I said, it's slightly bigger than a robin, and robins are more chestnutty in the chest as well. This has got a lot more white and grey flecks on it, so you can tell the difference, and the chances are if you do see a youngster, you'll see the adult feeding it, and that will give it away for you. The nightingale is split into 3 subspecies, which there's a population called the western nightingale, which is megarynchos megarynchos, which basically spends most of its time in our country and countries around us. There's also the Caucasian nightingale, which is Megarynchos africana, and that spends most of its time in the middle, and the eastern nightingale, which is Megarynchos golzi, which spends its time more in the Middle East and Central Asia. The collective noun for a group of nightingales, if you're ever lucky enough to see a group of nightingales, is a watch of nightingales. So this map is showing us where the species, the different subspecies, like to migrate. So you can see that Megarincos is the more central, the more Western European, and the one that Britain gets. And these guys on their migration head all the way down to Central Africa. So they are a sub-Saharan migratory species. All of the species fly across the most of Africa to get to the middle. Interestingly, with Golsey, which you can find in Central Asia, it's about double the size of Megarincos. So even though they're subspecies at the moment, there is potential that through genetics and through development of genetics that Golsey becomes its own species, because it is so much bigger than Megarincos. If you want to see nightingales in the UK, the distribution for our country is pretty much set to the eastern counties and the eastern corner. This map is from the BTO, so it's showing where potentially nightingales could be breeding, where they're confirmed breeding. So if it's a larger circle on the map, you've got confirmed breeding, which, as you can see, mostly occurs in the eastern sections of the country. There are some further north slightly, and there's also some possible breeding that could be going on up there. But as you go further up into Yorkshire and Northumberland and Scotland, you can see that those sightings really, really drop off. So in the UK, they're on the edge of their territory, their home range limit. And that can be a problem for them because there's less habitat for them to be able to potentially find suitable territories to breed in and start a family. So that makes them vulnerable to extinction in this country. I want to share with you the song as well, because it is one of the best songs out there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the song and then explain some of the attributes of it. So I didn't want to talk over it, so you could really enjoy the song. And one of the best descriptions I found for the song is that it's joyous, brilliant, full of trills and roulades. If that makes sense to you, then so be it. But for me, I think of it as quite a fluty call. The Wildlife Trust describes it as it often draws you into its phrases with a procession of high-pitched whining or piping notes. And you can hear that piping in the song. It may rapidly escalate the intensity to a fluty crescendo before switching to something entirely different, like a guttural chug, 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 interspersed with insect-like buzzing. It's one of the most varied calls on the whole planet for birds. They reckon there's up to 1,000 different notes in the call. And obviously, when we're looking at those subspecies, all of those subspecies will have different notes in their calls, and the songs will be slightly different. So the one I played is the one that we get in the UK, Megarincos, Megarincos. So if you are out and about looking for nightingales, that is the song that you're kind of trying to hear. And there are birds that can confuse with it, but for me, it's so diverse and it's so lovely that it's very difficult, I think, to actually get confused with it. As I said, it will sing during the day and during the night. And on migration, these birds arrive back in the UK in April, and they arrive to their territories, and the males, who are the singers, immediately start singing. They need to set up those territories and they need to attract the female to come in. So he will start singing. He'll sing all day, all night. He'll sing all the way into May, and singing takes a lot of energy. So these birds are constantly foraging for food, finding as much insects as they can, because that's their main diet, is insects and invertebrates. And they're foraging, and then singing. And once they get paired up, they completely fall silent. They sing a little bit, but only to say, this is our territory, please don't come here. They will not sing all through the day. If a male is unpaired, he will continue singing until the beginning of June, but then the song falls silent in June, and that male sadly has probably not found a female to breed with. So they need the females, and the song is what attracts them. And the louder, more diverse the song, the better male for that female. She's going to be more attracted to that song. The song is incredible. It's one of the loudest songs out there on the planet. It's been recorded at hitting between 90 to 95 decibels on the scale, which, to put that into context, is the same as a lion's roar, if you've been lucky enough to hear a lion's roar, or if you're a tennis fan and you've been lucky enough to sit on centre court at Wimbledon, Maria Sharapova's grunt. So we have got a kind of list of how high that can be. But yeah, it's an incredible noise. And urban nightingales are also being proven to go louder than that because they have to compete with traffic. So they're now starting to sing even louder than 90 decibels. If you want to see nightingales in Surrey, this is a historical and present map that the Surrey Biodiversity Information Centre kindly created for me. And the green dots are showing where our historical records through SBIC have been seen. So you might be able to see that actually the majority of records were through the centre of the county. However, historical records could be going back as far as 1970. So a lot of these habitats could have changed, and actually you may be even able to see the blue dots showing where the current nightingale surveys have been found this year. And as you can see, they're all much further south now and actually on the border with West Sussex. The Chiddingfold area and Milford, south of Godalming, are really, really good areas to find nightingales, and there are quite a few down there. If it's something that you would like to see this year, then I would say that you need to get out in the next week because they're going to start shutting up quite soon. So if you want to see them, head on out and try and hear that call. You're more likely to hear the call than you are to see the bird because they like to skulk around. We will discuss a bit later on why potentially the shift in pattern of this habitat, of this bird as well, and also why potentially the middle has lost its nightingales. As I said, they are on the tip of their range here. So if they are slowly but surely receding south, that could be a reason why. So what do they want from their habitat? Well, they need scrub, basically. Scrubby areas are favoured, and if there's a coppice site in there, which is when you chop trees back down to the base of the stem and then recreate new growth, that can help. That's a really, really favoured habitat. In order to survive in that habitat as well, they do need a constant water source, which is quite important for them. The scrub needs to be leveled. So if you have scrub that's all the same level, that isn't suitable. You need thick scrub up to about 2 meters tall. This allows them to hide away when they sing, and this is where the loudness comes from, because they have to be so loud. They're an unassuming bird, they're brown, and they need to sing for those females to hear them. They also need in the scrub bare ground, because that is where they find their insect and invertebrate prey. So they'll be scraping around on the ground, foraging, finding that prey, which is perfect for the chicks because it's high in protein, high in water content, and the chicks have the best chance of survival. There is a really, really interesting case study in Berlin, actually. So Berlin has some of the highest populations of nightingales in the world. The latest estimate is between 1,300 and 1,700 pairs in the city itself. And that's because Berlin has allowed a lot of its scrub to go natural like this. And that is what the nightingales favour. They reckon the population is increasing by 6% every year. They say that they think the nightingales come here because of the many wild and not yet over-maintained green spaces, which is hugely important because in this country, we like to tidy up. We like to clear the scrub. We like to maintain it. And that's not suitable for the nightingale. We also have a slight issue with the fact that we've lost a lot of our megafauna. Now, megafauna is large animals. Things like aurochs, bison have sadly now become extinct in this country, and they would have maintained this habitat for the nightingale. They would have gone in, they would have created paths, they would have munched on a lot of the vegetation, creating that bare ground as well, which would have been perfect for the nightingale. We have to do that now as humans and try and maintain and replicate that habitat, and that can be quite difficult. We also, in Surrey, have a lot of deer, and if we are coppicing or trying to maintain that, deer often nibble away at new shoots. They like to eat the new coppice, and again, that just sadly ruins the habitat for the nightingale and makes it unsuitable for the nightingale to nest there. So one could potentially argue that there may be other reintroduction programs down the line to help combat the deer. Something like a lynx that gets put into the environment could end up helping to create suitable habitats. Nature works in equilibrium and it needs to balance itself out. So anything that could potentially help the nightingale would be great. Everything is linked together and needs to work together to maintain that environment. So their status. This is how the IUCN measures all wildlife. And you have different options. You have extinct, extinct in the wild, critically endangered, endangered, vulnerable, near threatened, and least concern. You'll be pleased to know that globally, the IUCN lists the nightingale as least concern. In Europe, the numbers sit at 3.5 to 7 million, which is a really, really strong number. It's a really strong population. However, it's a completely different story in the UK. They are red listed. So in the UK, we list our birds green, amber, and red is in decline. And in 2018, the BTO have recorded a 92% decline in nightingales since 1970, which is a huge amount of birds to lose. Their breeding range has contracted by 43% in the last 40 years, so hence why on the map they're slowly moving south. The population in the UK stands at only 3,300 pairs, and that is isolated in our southeastern corner. As I said, there are many reasons for this, most likely the loss of the habitat, but also there is climate change affecting that, and there are dangers of the migration too. Nightingales can bounce back though. They do so really, really well. And there is a very, very wonderful project down in West Sussex in Horsham called NEP. NEP Estate has nightingale numbers increasing, which is fantastic. And year on year, those singing males are coming back and reusing the site. And I think they're upwards of 50 to 60 singing males now, which is a really, really positive story. Their threats, as I said, climate change is impacting the nightingales. In a study carried out in Spain, it is showing that the nightingale fledglings are actually fledging with shorter wings now. So if you remember, I said that they have a nice long wing to help with that migration. Well, if you look at this map, the arrows are showing us where these nightingales are traveling to. Now, this is a huge journey that these birds are undertaking. So a nice long wing will help you get there. It will make you fly better. It will help you save energy as you're flying as well. Sadly, you don't want a short stubby wing like a blue tit, which cannot migrate. You need a nice long wing to make it down there. So if the birds that are breeding are having shorter wings, that's going to be detrimental to the migration because they will not be able to fly as far and they will get into trouble. Some of these birds will often do huge chunks of the journey in one go. So in order, with that nice long wing, it means they can cover a lot of ground far quicker to get to where they need to go, which in this case is Central Africa, south of the Sahara. Global warming is also impacting on the breeding time as well. As our summers and winters become, as our winters become warmer and our summers become wetter, that is also detriment to these birds. When you're a migrant bird, you have to come back from Africa and you have to sing your heart out to get your territory. However, a lot of our resident birds are now being able to start singing and nesting a lot earlier, which is outcompeting those migratory species. They reckon in the UK now that spring starts a whole month earlier. So if you're down in Africa sunning yourself and you can't get back up in time, there's a chance you might lose that habitat. And being a bird that's the size of a robin, it fills the same niche as the robin, it fills the same niche as a blackbird or a song thrush. And all those birds, those three birds are resident birds starting their breeding cycle early, so slightly outcompeting the nightingale as well. Also, with more tropical storms coming, that can also impact on the nightingale because if they're flying up from Africa, they're obviously flying into a headwind and that can be detrimental to migration as well. So these freak rainstorms that we're having through April and May are also not great for this bird. So climate change is going to be a real detriment to this species, sadly. Loss of habitat as well is another problem for these birds. They're quite site faithful. They return to the same area year on year. However, with scrub, we look at scrub as untidy and a lot of scrub is dug up and development is put on there. So if you're a bird that's coming from the middle of Africa and you've flown all the way back to your nice scrub patch and it's gone over the winter because the development has come in, you'll have no energy to continue your migration to the next patch. So therefore, that bird sadly is not viable anymore because it is just exhausted from its long journey. And also, if there's less habitat, there's less places for the breeding males to sing and invite the females in. The reason Europe is still very stable with its population of nightingales is because they're not as tidy as us. They do like to leave the scrub and their farming practices are still the same as they were 100, 200 years ago, which is allowing the nightingale to continue to thrive. You've also got the dangers of migration. Megarynchos goes down Spain and over Gibraltar and into northern Africa, so it's not really at risk from some of the other things that you might have heard with places like Cyprus that catch birds in nets to put into the food market. So those populations going from the other side could be at risk of that, but the Megarynchos, with the way it goes down, is probably slightly less at risk from that. So how can you help? Well, the main thing we can help with is conserving habitat, and that has been proven in NEP. Nightingales bounce back quickly. It took 5 years for the population to recover, and now they're brimming at the seams with nightingales. The scrub needs to be managed, and it involves rotational cutting on a 10 to 15 year cycle. So this goes hand in hand with the constant monitoring as well. NEP is going to hit a point where it's going to exceed its carrying capacity because there's going to be so many nightingales, there's going to be excess nightingales that have to strike out and move into new territories. Now, as the crow flies, the Surrey border is about 10 to 15 miles away from the nightingales at NEP, and it would make sense for them to use those corridors to travel into Surrey. And if we can start getting the overspill from NEP, that will help our numbers to increase in the county. So managing habitat is really important as well. recording nightingales is hugely important too. We looked at the ESPIC map and the historical data, and actually there aren't that many records of nightingales because people probably took them for granted. They enjoyed the song and thought, that's nice, I've heard a nightingale, I'll carry on with my day. But now it's even more crucial to report those nightingales. And you can do that by sending your records to ESPIC if you want to. I've also launched this spring a citizen science project on nightingales to look at habitats that we could potentially find that are suitable for nightingales. Just because there's not a nightingale singing there doesn't mean that habitat isn't suitable. We may just not have enough nightingales to get to that habitat. So we're looking at singing males and recording them. And so far this year, we've recorded over 25 singing males, which is a huge amount of records, considering how many we originally had. So they're there. We've got that evidence now. We just need to see whether or not they're breeding and work out if we can create more suitable habitat. And as we said, it can bounce back quickly. In 5 years, we could be brimming with nightingales. It's not a pipe dream. It could really happen. The BTO, the British Trust for Ornithology, has carried out a study to show that breeding preferences in nightingales have changed as well. They used to be a woodland species. They used to enjoy breeding in woods, but not anymore. They have moved to this area just outside in the scrub with no overhanging trees. Pound for pound, the amount that use woodland is very low. I think it's fallen by over 70%. So now we must focus on this scrub, which is hugely important. And scrub is quite easy to link and create pathways between habitats. So if we start linking scrubby areas between those habitats and creating a corridor, that will also increase that NEP overspill to fly up into Surrey, which could be really, really exciting. As I said, grazing pressures can be a threat. Deer graze the coppice, so unless it's protected when you coppice, we won't be able to help the nightingale. We want that balanced environment. We need the predators, we need the grazers, but we need it to create that nice mosaic of scrub. It's really important. It's what they need. And the other thing that could be done is ringing as well. If a nightingale's got a ring on it, there's a chance it will be found again, and we can start working out where they're going and what areas they're using. I was very fortunate at the weekend to be invited to a farm in Cranley to work with some young recorders. And they asked me to do a bit of bird ringing. And I knew they had nightingales on site, but I said to them, do not expect to catch a nightingale. Well, I'm clearly no expert because within 30 seconds, this nightingale had flown into the net. So the fact is, we caught it, we ringed it. It was a male. I checked all the parts to see it was a male. And now we've got another record of a nightingale that's ringed in Surrey, and who knows where that data might end up. The BTO has got a map here of all of the nightingales that have been recovered. And as you can see, that's quite low. There's probably only about 20 recoveries there. So whether or not that shows the numbers are so low in this country that not enough are caught, or whether or not they're actually quite clever, and once they've hit the net, they realize, actually, I'm not going to go in the net again because that wasn't particularly fun. We don't know. But as you may be able to see at the very bottom of this map, the blue dot here signalizes winter. So this nightingale here flew all the way from the eastern coast of the UK all the way down to the Gambia. So we can start to slowly paint a picture now that we know these birds are heading down the coast of Africa to this central belt here. And the Gambia, if you've been lucky enough to go, is quite heavily forested. It's a rainforest, it's on the equator. So they obviously still like that forest environment in their winter habitat. However, they're not using that now in the UK. So there may be some studies that need to show why that is. You've also got the red dots, which show autumn migration. So we would expect these nightingales to all be around this area, although one got a little bit lost and went straight on into Denmark instead of down. But as you can see, they've gone down the French coast, They've hit the Spanish coast, through the centre of Spain, to the tip here, and then down it probably into Gibraltar and cross the sea there because it's a smaller crossing point. Birds are quite fearful of crossing water, so they'll try and make the journey as easy as they can. And then there's a couple of yellow dots which show the spring captures of these birds moving back up through the continent and then back into the UK. So ringing is super important for these birds. If we can catch more of them, we may be able to start getting more records to find out where these birds are moving. And that's incredibly important for protection, because not only can we protect them in the UK, we can also start to talk with other countries and say, well, actually, you've got our nightingale population moving through. Maybe you can set up some protection there as well. So all of this data is super, super important, and all of the records are super, super important as well. The nightingale also has a lot of cultural importance to us as a country as well. It's a symbol of transformation, resilience, and the power of love. The song is associated with love. In Roman culture, it was often associated with the goddess Venus, symbolizing love and the coming of spring. Now, if these birds are arriving in April and singing, I would associate that song with spring, and I would think, excellent, warmer temperatures are on the way, and spring is nicer and longer days. So I would associate them with that. So that's really brilliant that they bring that positivity. You also have Ode to a Nightingale, which was written by John Keats. And it's a poem about how wonderful poet the nightingale is itself, with all those different verses and all those different choruses. It just goes to show that this bird is so diverse. And John Keats himself was quite jealous of the nightingale in this poem. And he himself knew that he could never be on the same level as the nightingale. He said that the nightingale will never truly die. After his time, he will die and his work will die, but the nightingale will never truly die, because year on year it returns and sings its wonderful song. And so it will continue forever and ever. However, as I've said, 92% decline is a worry. And maybe in this country, there is a potential that this bird will not continue forever and ever unless we step in and encourage areas to promote the habitat for the nightingale, for it to be able to thrive. And that's what we want. And that's why NEP is so good, because they have thriving nightingales. We have a population now that is worth fighting for. It's also culturally important to many countries as well, and is included in, it is the national bird of Ukraine and Iran. Both countries that have been in the news for very different reasons. But again, this hope of this symbol of hope and transformation and resilience is important to all these countries. So it is really, really such an important bird. And when I was asked to talk about it, I thought that that was quite a great privilege, because I didn't know much about nightingales. I myself didn't see a nightingale till 2022. That's 2 years ago, and I pride myself on being a pretty decent birder, but I hadn't seen one. And the fact that I got to talk about them was really, really lovely. And they're quite a difficult bird to get to know. There is information out there, but there is a lot of information lacking in nightingales too. So I've had to do a lot of reading to present this PowerPoint and find out some information. So I learned a lot while looking into it as well. And they have become a real special bird to me now, probably one of my favorites. And I will always, every year, look forward to the song of the nightingale and look forward to its arrival. And I hope that I will get that for my whole life. And I hope that future generations to come will also get that. And with that said, I'd like to open the floor up to potentially any questions that people may have on the nightingale, and I will try my best to answer them.
Thank you very, very much for that, Dan. I can only speak for myself, but I thought that was fabulous. And it was great that you had that message of resilience and adaptability as well, because that encapsulates what we're trying to do for Surrey's landscapes, Surrey Wildlife Trust. It's all about creating those messy habitats, connecting them up, doing the research and monitoring so we can actually target our resources where they can have the biggest impact in helping species recover. And very exciting that we've got a species, a strong and growing population in the neighbouring county that we can hopefully bring through into our own territory in greater numbers year on year. So thanks for reiterating all that stuff. We've got some great questions, which I will now put to you. The first of which is from Jeremy Nason, who I understand is one of your citizen science team and has been out on the famous Knepp estate with you. He asks, will you mention the latest findings? I know you did talk about Knepp and the population increases there. Do you want to say anything more about that?
So with the project so far, we've just been collating the numbers this week. And as I said, there's about 25 new Nightingale records. Most of them, like I said, in the map are, and I can go back to the map if that helps, just to show, just very quickly. So here we are. The blue dots are these records, and as I said, they're mostly in the south of the county, with one exceptional record up here in Epsom and Ewell, which has been confirmed now, so that's excellent. But yeah, so there's about 25 records, but the project, even though we're focusing on the Nightingale, has developed 600 individual species records as well, which is just great for showing biodiversity and different species in the county as well. So the project is really, really working. And if we look at this blue section down the bottom here, as I said, 10 to 15 miles to Knepp, a nice corridor through here into West Sussex to lead the Nightingales up to this area. And then hopefully they'll start to spread out and we can start to connect maybe historical areas where they used to be as well, because they used to be there. There's a reason they like that area, whether or not it's changed or something has happened, but we can investigate that and maybe start creating a corridor. And what I would really love to see from this project is potentially the corridor spreading into the north of the county, where there are a few historical records, and hopefully allowing the Nightingale to move into more northern counties, create more land for that species. I'd also, on a side note, like to think that maybe London could become the new Berlin. And if they leave the scrub a little bit more messier, maybe Nightingales could return to London and sing in London again. That would be the dream, but we're a long way from that at the moment.
Berkeley Square. Yeah. Thanks very much for that, Dan. We've got another 3. Oh, more are coming in. My word, more and more are coming in. This is great. This one's from Stuart, and he wants to know, Stuart Pearson, I should say. He wants to know, he's been out surveying, and he's been surprised at how often he's heard 2 males singing closely to each other. How big are their territories?
Yeah, so one of the things that I did find when researching the Nightingale was there's not a lot of information on the territory size. So I would say if there are 2 male Nightingales singing closely together, that territory is prime, that habitat is prime, because there's enough resources for those 2 males to be singing near each other. Because they won't be fighting because they're trying to attract a female. So they might be competing and maybe only one female comes in and she goes with this male over this male. But if they're both singing there, they won't be fighting each other because they're too constantly focused on singing. So I reckon that if you do have them quite close together, that actually is really, really potentially very high quality habitat for the Nightingale.
At the volume of 2 lions. Which is extraordinary.
Yes.
There's another one. It relates to resources again. How much water do they need? Asks Stuart.
Not loads, I would say. It just needs to be a constant water source. So that could be simple as a cow trough. That could be a small pond. That could be a brook or a stream going through the area. It doesn't need to be huge. And when I was on site on Sunday, I actually said, oh, there's not a lot of water around here. And then they all turned around to me and went, yeah, there's just a pond over there. So it's not a huge water source. And by the sounds of it, they will share that water source as well. So, yeah, they don't need a huge amount of water, but it does need to be constant. If it was to dry up, I think that would be a problem.
And I know that nightingales aren't really a garden species, but what you say does relate to so many other species as well, doesn't it? The smallest amount of permanent water in a garden can attract so much nature. And I think there's something about that later on. There's another question. This one's from John Cotton. He says, I'm intrigued to see one blue outlier close to Chessington in the 2024 figures. Where was this recorded, please?
So that's the Epsom and Ewell area, I believe. So I'm just going back to the map. So it's the gone too far. Going to play the song again. It's the one up here. So there's Epsom and Ewell. There's a country park up there, and I can't remember the name of it. I'm really sorry. But that's where it was, and the actual place is called Nightingale Corner, funnily enough. And that's where they got their singing male, but I can't remember the name of the country park in Epsom and Ewell where it is. But I have spoken to 3 different people who work there who have all confirmed that there is a nightingale singing there. They're really fingers crossed hoping that it breeds, but it's still singing at the moment, so that call is unheard. So fingers crossed that a female might hear it.
Right. He might be an outlier, but he might not be alone forever. John Cotton wants to know, well, he has got something to tell us, which is heartwarming stuff. He was dropping some friends off to the long-term car park at Gatwick Airport in the early hours of the morning in mid-April and thought he heard a nightingale singing. Was I dreaming, or is this possible? Asks John.
I think it's probably possible because I think Gatwick is not a million miles away from Horsham, where Knepp is. And like I said, there is going to be an overspill. And it could be a nightingale that overshot and decided to start singing in Gatwick. It could be a nightingale that was from Knepp and has spread out and gone a little bit further. So I don't think that is a dream. I think that probably was a legitimate nightingale. And if you heard it in mid-April, even more so.
Great. Good that you heard that. Sean has a question. He has a compliment for you as well, Dan. You don't get many these days. Thanks for a great talk, he says. And he says, you mentioned climate warming as a pressure on nightingales from other birds starting breeding earlier in spring. This is a really interesting question. Does feeding small garden birds over the winter contribute to this pressure, do you think?
Well, it is a really interesting question. And I'm a big promoter of feeding garden birds. I love watching the birds come in, and I think you should feed them. However, there's no official studies done yet, but I would imagine that there are some theories, and I have my own theories. Take the humble blue tit, for example. It's a lovely bird, but our cold winters are meant to remove a portion of the population. And those weaker birds that may not necessarily survive are coming into the gardens now and feeding in the gardens and surviving. So therefore, the breeding population stock of blue tits is higher than it was maybe 10, 15 years ago. And blue tits, if you've ever met one on a street corner, are very aggressive. They like to put an elbow in, and they will often turf other birds, less dainty birds, out of the nests. Now, if they're starting to breed earlier, those other migrants that we could mention, so spotted flycatcher, pied flycatcher, redstart, haven't got a chance in hell because those habitats have gone, those nesting areas have gone, and they're not strong enough to displace the blue tit. So in order to get around that, what I would suggest is putting nest boxes up, because you're creating a habitat for a blue tit that takes away a more natural habitat where a redstart or a flycatcher can go in. So that would be the way around that. I would never advocate stop feeding because there are so many other birds that benefit from feeding. A lot of our finches, which are in decline, benefit from feeding. So yeah, it's a really, really tricky thing. It's a theory at the moment, but I think there is going to be some scientific evidence that starts to prove that. Those 3 species I mentioned have all got population declines of over 50%.
That is a fascinating take on it. So putting up a nest box can actually help to keep a healthier population density rather than distort it. Just going back to a previous question, Christine Dunford's very helpfully told us that it was Horton Country Park in Epsom Ewell. And Faye Pierce, taking on the theme that we've just been discussing, has asked, is there anything I can do personally with my garden in Surrey to help?
It's a really interesting question, because you could leave a patch of scrub at the bottom of your garden if it's large enough and see what comes along. The nightingale is our poster bird. It's the one that we want to talk about. However, numbers are so low, it might take time for that nightingale to find that scrub. But that doesn't mean that other species which are in decline won't benefit from that scrub area. So with the Citizen Science Project, we focused on 3 species, the nightingale being the main one, but we're also asking citizen scientists to record common whitethroat, which is a sub-Saharan African migrant and in decline, and one that may shock some of you here, the dunnock. The very humble dunnock, which is a resident bird, has now been listed on the amber list and is showing that numbers of that bird are declining. They need scrub to be able to build their nests and live. So you may not necessarily get a nightingale in your garden, and if you do, we'll all be coming round to your garden to see that nightingale, because that would be incredible. But you may be helping the humble dunnock, or you may be helping other species. Song thrush is another species that's in decline, 54%. So you could also start to help those species. So leaving a scrubby area may help the nightingale later on down the line, but immediately it will help a load of other species as well. It's all about this tidying up. We are typical British suburbia. We love tidying up, but scrub is so beneficial to so many species.
And I can jump in here, Dan, and do a little bit of a brag, because just this morning, my garden is extremely scrubby and managed for nature, really, to the exclusion of anything else. And I saw a nest of Dunnock's fledge this morning because of that. And they're in the densest patch of scrub. And they're absolutely fascinating birds, aren't they? Which we're not here to talk about them, but they are wonderful. Irene has a question. Sorry if she missed it, but were any of the 2024 records in a Surrey Wildlife Trust reserve?
No, I don't believe so. We'll obviously layer the map up, and because we've still got a week and a half of surveying potentially, and we also want to try and survey for young birds as well, so we'll continue into June, we won't produce the proper maps until after the survey has finished. And what we can do is we can layer Surrey Wildlife Trust sites on top of it to find out if they are on Surrey Wildlife Trust sites. But the project was to just go out and literally record wherever you wanted to, if that was on your walk, in your garden, on a street corner, wherever, and see if you could hear the nightingale. And I think a lot of these sites are not actually Surrey Wildlife Trust land, which is good and bad. Because bad because we're not protecting it, but good because we can start to engage with landowners and say, you have got breeding or singing nightingale on your site. There is a real reason to protect it. So hopefully these conversations will start to happen moving forward.
And we can segue very nicely into a question that Sheila Morley's kindly posted. She says, nightingales were on Bookham Common until 2 years ago. Any chance they will be back? With such good maintenance of the habitat, why did they disappear?
Bookham Common is a really, really interesting case study. So I can start with positive news. A singing male nightingale has been recorded on Bookham Common this year. Whether or not his call is heard is another matter. However, Bookham Common does have fantastic habitat, but I wonder whether it needs to be storied, like I said. So the scrub could have grown up and become unsuitable, which is why the nightingales moved on. And maybe it needs a bit more management and a bit more leveling out for it to suddenly become better again. Nightingales are quite delicate species, if that makes sense. Subtle changes can really change what they want to do. So even though they like the untidy scrub, it needs to be leveled. It needs to have different levels for them to be able to be happy and thrive in. So whether or not that Bookham Common scrub has not been leveled out or is starting to be leveled out again, and that's why it's returned, I don't know. It'd be fascinating to find out.
And I guess of some of this research and monitoring work that you're leading will hopefully give us a better picture of where we'll need to target our work towards creating that those different levels of scrub. there's another one from Kerry Blower, who lives in Reigate, and she knows of 2 sites where there's a nightingale. One of the sites has no protection at all, she says. The landowner is cutting a lot of the scrub. How can you, as a wildlife trust, protect a habitat that's so vulnerable and yet has no legal protection? Well, we can't protect it if we don't manage or own it, sadly, is my answer to that.
Yeah. It's a really interesting question because it is a tough habitat to engage with. But this Nightingale project was born because I was invited to sit on something called the Heathlands Connections Partnership. Now, Heathlands Connections Partnership sounds like we're connecting heathlands with heathlands, but we can't do that because that's quite difficult. We're connecting our heathlands with other habitats. So we want to connect those heathlands so that species can move between them. And I was sitting in the meeting and I had a brainwave. If you're going to look at a habitat to start engaging landowners with, then scrub is a really good one to do because, as you said quite rightly, it doesn't have much protection. And so we can start to engage and educate landowners about how important scrub is. But you can't just go into a landowner and go, you've got scrub, you need to protect it. You need hard evidence of crucial keystone species for them to think, oh yeah, actually, I should protect it. So that's where the nightingale came from. It's the poster bird for this project because if we go in and say to a landowner, you've got nightingales, hopefully that conversation can start to open up.
Yeah.
We're not there yet, and we've got a lot of work to do, and we're trying very hard, and we're continuing to formulate plans, and they are starting to engage landowners. It's just going to take time because there's so many of them. But hopefully, once we get that going, more scrubby areas can be protected going forward.
As you said earlier on, it's monitoring and research that really matters, and it's not very rock and roll sounding. People don't necessarily open their wallets in excitement, but it's absolutely crucial to effective conservation, isn't it? And we're going to do much more of that. Christopher Campbell, but we have 3 more, so you can relax fairly soon, Dan. And thank you everyone for those really great questions. Christopher Campbell's got one, and he asks, since there's a reasonable amount of lowland heath in Surrey which supports scrub, is this suitable habitat? I tend to associate nightingales with woodland scrub rather than heath. Is that correct? We used to have nightingales on Effingham Common, where there was and still is scrub. We now have 30 acres of woodland trust woods alongside with some scrub below woodland. Could this be a suitable area to encourage by using suitable habitat management? Sounds like the answer is going to be yes to that. PS, is the Epsom site Horton Country Park? I think we're going
Yes, yeah.
on that.
Yes, thank you for saying that it's Horton Country Park. In answer, yes, your habitat will be suitable. It's just they need to find it. And like I said, with the overspill from NEP, they will find it because these birds have got to go somewhere. With regards to heathlands, it's a really, really good question because, as I said, the BTO study is showing that nightingales are changing where they like to breed. And there is another species which has done that, which is associated with the heathland, and that is the nightjar. Nightjars are not typically heathland species when you start reading about them, but because the habitat is really kind of left untouched and the nightingales have got and the nightjars have got to go somewhere, and I'm going to get them confused now, they have started to use the heathland. So that's not to say that external pressures might push the nightingale onto the heathland. However, the one thing I would say is heathlands are a lot drier and a lot more arid habitats. There is water, there is ponds. We know for Chobham Common, for example, there are plenty of ponds on there, but it is not as damp and wet as a woodland edge or a scrubby woodland edge. So that could be a reason why they're not there. It's not to say that they might not be there, and the historical map, the historical records show some nightingale sightings on these heathlands. So perhaps, potentially, who knows? And with the Heathlands Connections Partnership linking the habitats with scrub, that might encourage nightingales to move up the corridor into those areas. We just don't know yet. It's all an unknown quantity.
And I don't know if this is directly relevant, but we've talked a lot about climate resilience and potentially re-wetting areas of heathland as a response to that, haven't we? So that might potentially help nightingales in the longer term too. if those plans come to fruition. The next two aren't actually questions, they're useful points. Irene says she also has dunnocks in her garden, and they are so loud too. We all love dunnocks, at least Irene and I do, and I know you do. But yeah, shout out for the dunnocks. And Christopher has a point to make. Effingham Common also links with Bookham Common, which Sheila just mentioned as having nightingale populations. So again, connectivity point being usefully raised there. Before we let Dan off the hook, if anyone wants to ask a last question, type away as furiously as you can. We'll give you 10 seconds. Should we give them 10 seconds for one last question? It could be that everyone's exhausted themselves at this point. We've got more than 50 people here, and a good proportion of you.
We probably feel all like a male
questions.
nightingale through the month of April, singing 24 hours a day, to be honest.
Yeah. I'd really like to know, I don't suppose there's a way of finding out how many of the 50 plus people here have actually heard a nightingale. I haven't in Surrey. Irene says, thank you, Dan. And I also say thank you, Dan. And I think we all do. That was wonderful. And thank you very much, everyone, for joining us this evening. We hope to do more of these. And if we do, I very much hope we'll see you there. Don't forget, keep supporting us. We're so grateful for your support in whatever way you give it. And goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very, very much.